Welcome back to Screenfish Radio. I am thrilled you could join us this week as we are talking about Damien Chazelle's Babylon. This week, I have a great group of guests. I am excited to have Screenfisher Seun Olowo-Ake. Did I do it the right time?
Just keep going again.
Every time. Newcomer Daniel Eng and our friend of the show, Adam Kline. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you could be here.
Hi.
Glad to be here.
Thanks for having us, Steve.
Anytime. And this is going to be a fun one for us to discuss because we are talking about, as I said, we were talking about Damien Chazelle's Babylon. Babylon tells the story of decadence, depravity, and outrageous excess that leads to the rise and fall of several ambitious dreamers in 1920s Hollywood. I want a better description of that because that is kind of annoyingly brief. How do I describe it?
Accurate to me.
It's fairly accurate, actually. So let's go from there. As always, this podcast is rated S for spoilers. But I cannot wait to get into this one. I would love to hear from you all what you thought of Babylon.
Yeah, I thought it was really good. What more do you want to know? I don't know what else.
What was that?
I said, what more do you want to know? I don't know what else to say. I really liked it.
It was nice.
No, I really loved it. It was really good. I
What
feel
did you
like
like
we'll get
about it?
more into my thoughts when we go on. I liked the themes that I saw in it. I think like I've been seeing lots of people, some people online saying they think it's a bit excessive and they don't get the movie. Like, why is this movie this long and why are we watching this? But I actually think it had some really interesting themes that we can explore more as we talk. Yeah, that's what I like about it.
Okay. Great. Daniel.
Yeah. I mean, I had a pretty unique experience watching this film. I saw it at my local independent theater, Film.ca in Oakville, and I was the only one there. So I got to see it at theater by myself, I guess, as Chazelle obviously intended it. But yeah, when I walked out of the movie, I definitely liked it a lot. It was in my top 15 films of the year. And it really felt like I had seen a movie. Is what I really felt. Like, I don't know, that's kind of what I felt like. I can't explain that exactly.
We all saw a movie.
Yeah. I know people
Daniel,
see
I
movies.
get it. I get
but,
what you're saying.
Yeah,
You're just like movies, right? Movies.
Yeah,
That's what that was.
You feel like you saw a movie.
Absolutely.
And yeah, like the cinematography was something I really respected out of that. I always love Chazelle's work behind the camera, and the entire ensemble is great. I think everyone does a great job.
You had one of the best descriptions I've seen of the film, actually, Daniel, because I was reading your favorite films of the year for our site, and he wrote just so you guys know as well. He described The Fabelmans as the best film about Hollywood this year that you could take your parents to. And then he described Babylon as the best film about Hollywood this year you cannot take your parents to. And
That's great.
That was amazing.
That's great. That's really appropriate. Yeah. I mean, and to build off of what Daniel said, I mean, it's total cinema. That's a hashtag I've been joking around with because of a podcast I love. This is a kitchen sink film, right? Like it's everything. But and for me, like I'll just say, like, I am my expectations going in, I sort of had mentally prepared myself. I don't like to know a lot about a movie going in, but I knew that it was going to be excessive. I knew it was going to be debaucherous and just way over the top on purpose, like with great intention, right? Like the excessiveness is intentional, the cynicism is by design. I knew it. So in my mind, I sort of had like Wolf of Wall Street in my head, of like, just prepare yourself for that level of debauchery and depravity and all that kind of thing. And if you know that, then at least you can even keel it, right? You can filter it or process it. And also my other expectation is just that I'm a massive Damien Chazelle fan. Like his previous 3 films are all 5-star for me. Like they are just masterpieces, and so and this film really kind of brings those ones together. There is a sort of through line and thematic threads to his films and what he likes to do, and even again like the cynicism that he brings to his narratives over and over again, just from different angles. But I mean, Daniel, you said you saw it in a theater with one person. I saw it like right away, like when it first came out. So not that, and I mean, you know, you were joking before the recording, like the downfall of the box office, right? Like, so it's not like it was making a lot of money and having huge attendance, but I at least saw it in the first week or two, and so there were some people in the theater with me, like 20 or so. I think most of them were older folks. So and I don't know that they were as mentally prepared for the film as I was, because a few people walked out, and I was just kind of like, yeah, that makes sense. And then throughout the film, the 3 hours that the film is, there was lots of audible groans and sighs, and I was just like, this is a very appropriate reaction to this film, because I think honestly, I don't know if it's the best thing I can say about it. Well, it's definitely not the best thing, because I actually really love this film, but it's a film I do not recommend to most people. Like, do not most people hearing this, seeing this, just don't see it. It's not going to work for you. For most audiences, for most people, it's too much and it's too long, right? Like that. Like and the thing, again, I would argue, is that while Damien Chazelle, I'm sure, wanted it to be profitable, he did not make a movie for everyone. He made a movie for cinephiles. Like this, Babylon is a movie for movie lovers and movie lovers only. If you know history of cinema, if you know the intricacies of the industry and the corruption, and anyways, that's who it's for. If you're just a casual moviegoer and you're like, oh, cool, a movie about the silent era with Brad Pitt, it's like, just stay home. Just don't rent it. Like, it's not gonna be your thing. But for those who truly love the history and the art of cinema, it's gonna pull our heartstrings. Like it's for us. So anyways, a little long-winded, but that was my general reaction there.
I want to explore what you just said there, because you said this is a movie for movie lovers.
Mm-hmm.
That is a fascinating statement, because first of all, I found this film fascinating. I really did. I did not expect to be as interested in this as, because I'd heard things. I saw it later on. We were not the only people in the theater, but I think Shay, you covered this for us beforehand, right? So
Mhm.
I didn't see it for about a month, and I remember so I was like, I don't know what I'm gonna get. I've heard some stories, and it's wild, but I actually really respected it. But is it a film for movie lovers? Because this is a film that literally opens by taking a collective dump on the movies. And I'm not even being metaphorical. That's how the film opens. It's a giant blast of feces in the face. And
yeah, the PG version is the first 5 minutes of the movie. There's poo and there's pee. Like, it's just like it's just like, if you're not, I mean, which again, like, if you're not getting the metaphor, or you're not, like, if you don't know what you signed up for, like, walk out now. Like, that's like Chazelle's warning, right? Like, this is how the film begins. Like, you're either in for the ride or you're not, right?
but that's my point. Like, is this a film for movie lovers? Because I would argue that maybe La La Land was a film that was more celebrating the movies, and this film goes entirely the opposite way. So I don't know what you all think of that.
It's also funny to me when you brought up the idea that this is a movie for movie lovers, because, you know, as cynical as critics can be, I think most of them would call themselves movie lovers, regardless of how critical they can be. And critics didn't really like this movie that much. They were definitely mixed on it. So then I personally think it's a bit of both. I think in this movie, Chazelle is very much pointing out both the times of like the beauty and like the almost like transcendent part of Hollywood that movies can create, but at the same time, just all the kind of the damage that it causes to the people working in it, and, you know, how it can kind of you know, take them in and just drop them off right after and just leave them worse off, while at the same time, you know, that's also a product of what they were doing in order to, you know, the characters literally say it, like Brad Pitt has that whole speech about, you know, we're gonna print our something to history on celluloid, you know, and be like, we're not alone. And that's, you know, really what the film's talking about, but it's also talking about how much, you know, crap they have to go through to get to that.
I've got the quote. I've got the quote here for you, Daniel. Actually, because on a separate recording, I tried to act it out for fun, but like Brad Pitt says, we have to redefine the form, map those dreams, print them into history, so that everyman can look up at the flickering screen and say, "Eureka! I am not alone." And it's just and like again, that's very early on the film, right? Like that's the optimism, right? Like that is, if you want to tie it to La La Land, like it, like that. I mean, and here's the I do appreciate you bringing up La La Land, Steve, because I also I'm a big defender of that film. For some people it's too sugary sweet. No, it's like, for again,
I'm like, who
in,
are there a
in
lot
our
of people that
circles,
hate La
I feel
La
like there was
Land?
a small niche. Yeah.
no, in our well, at least in my circles, when it comes to film critics and like there's it's just too sugary sweet and whatever. But I would argue that the film, and most people who don't love it but like it or respect it, is that they criticize the ending of La La Land. But to me, like that's the entire thesis, is that you have this shiny, glossy, optimistic, you know, because Damien has quite openly over the years just said like everything is Singing in the Rain for him. Singing in the Rain is the be all end all of cinema for him. And he, so in a way you can you can psychologize it, like saying like he just keeps remaking Singing in the Rain, that La La Land is Singing in the Rain and Babylon is Singing in the Rain. And the thing that keeps La La Land to me in tight relationship with Babylon is the ending, right? Which I love, because it's not a happy ending. It has all this gloss and optimism and hope for 2 hours, but then the end is starkly realistic and filled with sort of loss, right, in a sense. And then Babylon is the thing that carries that forward to like its ultimate extreme, right? And you're right. I mean, and I'll go back and just like, you know, disclaimer what I said, that I'm not saying that Damien was entirely successful in terms of making a movie for cinephiles, for movie lovers, but that was his only audience in my mind. Like the film, yeah, the film is divisive. The critics are sort of split 50-50 on the reactions to it. But like I would argue, and plenty can say I'm wrong, and I might be wrong, but just like it's hard for me to imagine people outside the movie loving world like getting it, like appreciating it for what it's trying to be.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
I feel like, I'm sorry. I feel like
no,
he, I know, like, I think he was very much just painting, like, you know, that it is what it is kind of thing. Like, Hollywood is this machine, and this is what goes on within it. And I feel like that kind of thing of like the optimism and then like the reality, that's just how life is. And I feel like even like filmmaking, like you start off with like, oh, I have this big dream, and like I watch films and they make me feel a certain way, so now I want to go do that. And I know that's like that was my experience. It's like you're very like young and like bright-eyed, and then you start like the actual work, and then you see like, oh, life isn't like the movie that I'm seeing or the movie that I want to make. And even the process of making this film is very messy, but then the film is like something so perfect, and that's just how it is. And I think that's what Babylon also just presents. Like this is this like really glamorous side of things, and then at the same time, here's this messy thing that exists within the glamour.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I see. I like what you're saying there, Shay, because I think that there is an optimism in many of the characters in this film, but it is, as the film progresses, it is quickly undercut. You know, and you know, I hear the comparisons, Adam, to like Singing in the Rain. And structurally it sort of follows that, but it's in some way, to me it is so much like the anti Singing in the Rain. Like the Singing in the Rain, the whole point of the cinema, like, well, see, I mean, this was something I wanted to talk about. I would love to hear from you both, because the end of the film, and we do spoilers here, but the final scene of the film has Manny sitting in there watching Singing in the Rain on screen. That's what he's watching, and he starts to cry. Not dramatically. He's been through this incredible journey, and he starts to tear up. And I'm just wondering from you all, why you think that is, because I know that Chazelle likes to have you sit at the end of a film and go, "I'm not sure what you meant by that." The same thing happened in Whiplash, La La Land to a lesser extent. Adam, I don't know what I can't even say that First Man was fine, but I can't say it was a 5-star film. But I mean, like,
it ends in the same in an ambiguous way. With a bit
it
of an
does.
emotional cliffhanger, like a lack of resolve. You're right.
Yeah.
He does.
So I would agree with I agree with that, though. In each of his films, he likes to end that way. So I just want to hear your opinion. And what do you think of this finale of him sitting in a theater with people who are cheering, and he's got tears coming down his cheek. What does that mean to you?
So I'll just finish my earlier thought to say that it's two sides of the same coin, where La La Land is excessive in optimism and hope and ends on a sad note. Babylon is excessive sadness that ends on a hope, a note of hope, right? Because because Damien's obsession with film is philosophical, it's existential, right? It's human nature, and we can theologize it in terms of our broken nature, and yet we are still we still hold the potential for divine beauty and creativity, that in spite of our brokenness, depravity, and sinfulness, we are still made in the image of a beautiful God, and have the abilities to co-create incredible and beautiful things. And that's, again, we don't have to keep the comparison to La La Land, but to me, that's the conversation that he's creating between these two films, is that we can look at ourselves and life itself and art itself as almost entirely beautiful and hopeful, but then pause for the reality that life is not fair, or we can start with the darkness and the excessiveness and the depravity, and then we have to pause and cannot deny the fact that there is still hope and beauty available to us. And that's where I connect, with Manny there.
For sure. What about the rest of you?
So actually, one of the things I was curious about, because they released the screenplay for this, and as a screenwriting student, I thought I'd check it out, because I was very interested in how he was writing his ending. And it does give a little more insight into exactly what Chazelle is like intending for it. But it's a little bit different from what is in the actual film. For one, it doesn't mention the big montage at the end.
Oh yeah.
At all. It doesn't mention that. That was, I guess, an idea they had either in the editing room or while making the movie. But it initially starts out with Manny recognizing himself and Margot Robbie's character Nellie in like the movie that he's watching. And then it has the crowd laughing at like a line she says. And so he becomes mad at the idea that they're all laughing at all this work, all the literally their life, literally also like Nellie's life, like literally put her entire life into the movie, and yet people are like laughing at it. But then and so he becomes upset. That's when it says he begins to cry. But then he also realizes that they're enjoying the movie, even if it's not what he intended. They're like enjoying the movie. And then like he starts to become happy about that. And like I think that's what he kind of realizes while watching Singing in the Rain, is like he's realizing that he himself can also be like an audience member, and like we can all join in together and delight in like a movie. And obviously for Chazelle, that ultimate epitome of that is Singing in the Rain. And so then they're all watching that, and he's just that's when he starts to feel more of that joy and that hope and that optimism. And I feel like that's probably the same for Chazelle. And like, he knows that Hollywood is not a great place all the time. But then he can watch something like Singing in the Rain, or feels like he can watch other great movies and be like, okay, there's a kind of a reason that they make movies in a industry that still can be fraught with, debauchery and things that obviously don't treat people that well.
That's so interesting. That's so interesting to me. Shay, what do you think?
I find it interesting because when I saw the film, unless I'm forgetting, but when I saw the film, I thought Manny's scene at the end was just sadness. Like I thought he was crying because he was watching the film and was like, oh, I used to be, like you're mourning like your younger years kind of thing. Like I used to be part of this, and now I am no longer. That's what I thought was going through his mind when he was watching it. Yes, I thought he was just kind of mourning like the fact that he's no longer a part of this machine that was weird and messy, but also that I think he loved in the first place, and that's why he did it. But also listening to people talk now, I'm like, oh, that makes sense too. That he's started off there and then gone to the thing of, oh, but wait, there is still something beautiful. And even the idea of he can now like surrender himself to the process, which is one of the things for me that stuck out. Is like, I want to be this person in Hollywood, but then at the end of the day, if I am no more, if no one ever remembers me, but the machine keeps going, then have I contributed something worthwhile? And am I okay with being in the background or fading away and that thing going on without me? So, yeah.
I actually really love that too, because because you're right. I think you're right. Like that there was a sadness for him as well. Because grief can be a beautiful thing, right? The sense of loss of his younger years and what he was a part of, and being away from it for so long, having lost those friends and those relationships. I mean, because he loses the love, right? At what he thought was the love of his life, he loses her to the industry and to that way of life, that debauchery and addiction. um but you keep mentioning the machine, and I really appreciate that, because um that's another huge element that stuck out to me and lingered with me, is the way that it tells the story, right? Like Singing in the Rain, it tells the story of going from the silent era to the sound era, and the way that the industry changed, and the way on all the lives that were lost or disregarded along the way. And of course, that's like, I hope I'm not stepping your toes, Steve, but like that's where like the whole Babylon metaphor comes from, like the fall of an empire, right? The corruption and the collapse of an empire, and that the biblical analogy of Babylon, and just the fact that that human history has just been empires of Babylon set on repeat, rise and fall, rise and fall, rise and fall, and Hollywood is no different, because you have this machine of art being made and being corrupted and colluded with capitalism, right? And so the film starts with this mayhem, and that even when we get away from that opening 30 minutes of an orgy, and we actually finally get on set, right? Manny finally gets to visit a Hollywood set for the first time. It's still just as much mayhem and madness, and people are dying, and like there's no unions, there's no safety, there's no protocol. It's just absolute utter beautiful chaos. And then that madness that produced so much, it then enter the sound era, then suddenly it becomes mainstream, and money starts to become involved. And like for me, the main crux of the film, all it seesaws on that opening orgy to the high class party that Margot Robbie's character can't can't pretend to be in, and she ends up vomiting everywhere, right? Like it's the juxtaposition of those two parties, and the change in culture, the change in the machine, and all those kinds of things, right? And that's that. And again, and it's not like it stopped there, right? It happens today. Damien's living through that now, because it's just a cycle of constant of capitalism and creativity and the negative and the positive influences of those Babylons, right?
You know what, and this is a bit of a side note, but I know this isn't what your the thrust of your argument was there, but I realize I haven't said this yet. Can we all agree that Margot Robbie can do anything? Uh, she's phenomenal,
Yeah.
and I think, um, I honestly have, forgive me for saying it in this way, but when she first came on, I thought she was going to be another pretty face. But she is so insanely talented. Like, she can do anything. We've seen her do all sorts of different roles, and I mean, she brings this character to life from start to finish. I mean, I don't want to take anything away from Diego Calva because Manny's a great character too, but Margot is she is the stereotypical dreams in her eyes starlet who by the end has been so broken by this system that it's just, it's heart-wrenching, but she's just so good. She's so good. Yeah, I find Manny's relationship to film in this film to cinema in this film so fascinating, because by the end he's been through so much. And see, I saw it kind of like you did, Shay, where he's brought his burdens into the theater, but there's this interesting shift that happens, and I skew just as much to the celebration of beauty. It's almost like I don't think he would say it was worth it, but I think he would say that there's something good that's happening here. But he's also been through all the things that aren't good. He's been literally 4 floors down to see Tobey Maguire pay a man to eat a mouse, or whatever it was, a rat, whatever that. He's seen the worst parts of it, and then he sees the product, but nobody else in the theater knows what he knows. Nobody else knows the story. It's such a fascinating moment to me.
Well, it's true. I mean, it is like, it's also, I really appreciate you both bringing this up, because it is also this act of, like I couldn't help but get swept up in what those final moments were doing for me in contrast to the journey. But in terms of Diego's character, right, like it is this act of reconciliation, right? It is because it's his first time back to LA, right, since he left, and he left the love of his life behind, right? And so it is this first time back, his first time encountering all of this, right? Like, even just the juxtaposition of like his first day on set, seeing like just the timber frame of the entrance to the movie studio, to his return, all those years later, to an actual proper movie studio entrance, like, so yeah, it is very much, right, he's overwhelmed because it's just this reconciling act with his past, right?
Yeah, it really is. Let's talk about this Babylon metaphor too. I know, Adam, you did a great job of introducing it here. I kind of love that this film is called Babylon, if that makes any sense, because first of all, it's not a term we use in everyday passing. Like, it's just like there's meaning in that metaphor. Obviously, I see it, and I mean, anybody in the church sees the application of the term Babylon. But I'm just wondering, for you all, when we talk about Babylon itself in this film, what do you think the fatal flaw of Babylon is here? What is driving it towards a fall, or does it have a fall? Because again, at the end, it doesn't really seem to collapse on itself. But I'm just wondering about what you think of that, what the fatal flaw is of Babylon in this film.
I think it's the excessiveness. And I would say that maybe the way the film portrays it, even at that time, the way Hollywood is operating, there didn't seem to be as many checks and balances as there would be maybe even now. Um, and so it seemed like this thing where it was like people thought, oh, this is a fun space and we get to be creative and it's not like a regular job, it's like this idea of like fun, and then we have all this access to all these things that we didn't have access to before. And so any person could just go overboard with it. And I think that's like when that just continues over and over again, that's what can lead to the fall of Babylon. And I would say that, like, because Hollywood does still exist, but the way Babylon existed back then is not the way it exists now. So in a sense, I would say it did kind of fall or like change to survive, if you know what I mean. So even like Nelly, if you use when she's a star, she goes back to these parties and everyone's different, everyone's more put together and more like poised. That even seems like a kind of like refinement of what she started off in. And I think again, even now with all the scandals that come in Hollywood, we have more things protecting people that are working or different things like that to create a safer or more stable, I think, environment than what it was originally. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's interesting you said that, because that was going to be my response when you said you think it's different now. Because maybe in the last 5 years we've seen some change, but I think we've also seen in the last 5 years that maybe it's not so different now. Or again, what I find fascinating about Babylon in this movie is that so much of it is, by the end of it, so much of it is dug underground, not well, both literally and figuratively. In fact, it's the moral police that drive it under there. If I remember correctly, um, because the things they were doing before in the silent film era, I think they even describe it, because Margot Robbie, she shows her breast or something like that. If I remember, yeah, that was it. And then they said what you were doing before was pornographic, and I remember them using that and going, oh, okay, and they wanted this new sort of pristine look, but everything was still there. I don't know. It's interesting. Daniel, Adam, what do you think?
Well, I mean, I would agree, like just this sense of, again, like the cyclical nature of it all. Like we've, even in our lifetime, we've lived through a rise and fall of sorts, and that even when the money got involved and things became mainstream and more widely accepted, the part of that sort of a high society scene, right, is also showing that the human nature and depravity is still there, just below the surface, right? Like it's still present. It's just more polished, right? And because that was the rise and fall of it in a lot of ways. At that time was the sense that in the midst of the chaos and the mayhem of the silent era, it was this miraculous safe haven for um for those on the fringe of society, right? Like that, like there's incredible diverse representation in the first hour of the film during the silent era. On screen, we see a female director and the collective agency of different sexual orientations and identities being represented there. And I've even heard Damien in a recent interview say that, like, as the film progresses, and the camera pans across different crowd scenes, there's an intentional design of less and less diversity. Like the first hour begins with excessive diversity and wide representation, because that's what the silent era of Hollywood was. And then as things became more mainstream and money became more involved, and as you said, like the moral code, quote unquote, things became more homogenous. And he said that was the visual design of the picture as it progresses to become more and more homogenous, right? And because as soon as money and mainstream and moral code and all these things got involved, then all of these these people on the fringe of society, or diversity itself began to be pushed out. And then we have that, of course, that horrible, heartbreaking scene with the trumpet player. I'm forgetting the actor's name, but this incredibly painful scene where he has to put makeup on himself because of the arrangement, because of the lighting and all of these things. That's where the film really takes a hard turn. And maybe that doesn't work for everybody, but it was deeply impactful for me. And that turn with Brad Pitt's character realizing that he had been lost to the system, to the new direction the machine was going, right? But there is, in spite of, or in the midst of, again, the excessiveness, the debauchery and the depravity, there was this acceptance, there was this freedom and of a world of misfits that was then lost and rejected, and in a slightly different way, but in the same ways, in very similar ways, in our lifetime, the last couple of decades, we've kind of lived through that again, where we've seen in the industry, in the machine of Hollywood, we move from a homogenous collection of storytellers and screen representation to something becoming far more diverse and more true to reality in our society, right?
Yeah. And that's definitely something I noticed throughout the film, because you see like someone like Margot Robbie, who's maybe, from a very small town, destitute, like sort of hillbilly white trash, you might even say, kind of area of, like, I don't know, New Jersey or something. I think that's where they say your character's from, coming to Hollywood, and then being accepted in this like place where, again, there's no rules, there's rowdiness, and then Manny and Lee Jun Lee's character, who Lady Hey, maybe this is her name. I'm trying to remember what her name is. But are like all like bigger parts of the movie. And then it does take that shift where, especially in that party scene, like they're all the same people. And like, I think one of the big things about this film is that there's not really any particularly good people, or at least they all definitely make very morally questionable choices. Manny, literally our main character, like Manny, the guy we've been following the whole time, is the one who gives that character, the trumpet player, the blackface, and basically almost insist, it's part of the system, but he's the one who basically insists that he has to wear it in order to have them all look the same, because otherwise it would make him basically too distinctive from the rest of the band that's playing in that scene. And that kind of happens within the rest of the movie. Like I was looking through a little bit of some of the ideas around Babylon, and there's like this idea, and I don't know if Damien was going for this, but in Rastafarian culture, it's the idea that Babylon's like a materialistic capital where, there's the exploitation of oppressed people around the world. And also it's specifically people of African descent, and we definitely see that in that scene in particular. But then you kind of, that's basically all I'd say. Lost my train of thought.
I like what you guys. Sorry, go Shay.
Sorry, see, I do find it interesting. Sometimes I think about this sometimes, but then with the film as well. How that people want to be celebrities, they want to be actors or singers or whatever, they want to be on stage because it gives some sort of like power or a semblance of power. But then you think about it sometimes and you're like, the people with the power really are the people who are paying you to be there or watching you, because you almost have to do whatever they say if you want to keep eating, if this is what gives you money and sustains you. So that's something that's interesting in the film as well, I think, of like Nelly's like, I'm a star, but then getting lost in the system, it's like being a slave to other people and what other people want you to be. And then again, when that tone shifts, and then more the people with money are the people who are now more poised and refined. Now you have to be that, and you have to hide these things if they offend their sensibilities and things like that. So that's something I think is interesting as well.
Yeah, I like what you're saying there, because the idea of where the power lies is sort of pops in and out of this film along the way. because it really starts with the money. And you see when Margot first comes in, they're like, okay, try this, now do this, now do this thing. You have to do it this way, and you have to do it this way, um, and just to get in the door. But and this diversity angle you guys are bringing up as well, I think is fascinating within the film. Because again, once when power takes over, that's one of the first things to go. It becomes more of a machine than it was when it was originally. And that scene where they're filming the movie in the desert like one of the opening, where they're making the first film in the desert, all those little things, is fantastic. I love that. It's just utter chaos, and you just people are getting injured on set, left, right, and center. But everybody's like, oh, this is like it's. But they seem to be there because they want to be part of this, but then they're there and it's not what they thought. Like you were saying, Shay, as well. It's such a fascinating tension that's held throughout this film. You know whose character I actually I really enjoy watching his journey is Jack Conrad's, Brad Pitt's character, because I feel like he's one of the characters that recognizes the power of the medium. And so few of them actually realize that until maybe the end of the film or something. But most of them are just doing it for the money, and he's doing it for the money. Like, let's be serious, he's doing it for the money and the fame and the power. He's not a good character, but he wants to do more than just tell stories. He wants to tell stories that help shape people. But no one's listening to him. And mind you, partially because he's a drunk and a womanizer, and nobody really cares what he has to say. But by the end of the film, when he eventually shoots himself in the bathroom, he's just done. He's just done fighting for this thing. It's changed too much. He's lost his place. The way things were doesn't work in his world anymore. And there are so many puzzle pieces that fit at the beginning of the movie that do not fit at the end of the movie.
In the first 90 minutes, right? Like he's taking it or the first hour, he's taking his craft for granted, right? And he, like you said, the money and the fame and all that stuff. But then, there's that really pivotal scene with his Broadway actress wife, his like third or fourth wife at that point, but his Broadway actress wife who's like giving him notes and trying to in her mind make him a more legitimate actor, but he's resistant to it, right? Because she's trying to defend the fact that he's also kind of discovering at the same time what he really cares and invests in this. Like we finally see him in the last hour really care about how it comes off on screen, and again, part of it has to do with the sound, because he has this sort of devastating moment where he peeks into a movie theater and because of his audible delivery of lines, the audience laughs, and so they don't get it, and so he's wrestling with what it is he can do and where his strengths do lie. And it's heartbreaking, but it's also fascinating to see him because you keep pointing out that like these aren't like good, admirable people, and they're not, right? Like these are people who make a lot of bad immoral choices. And I think what's incredibly powerful about the film is that in spite of all of that, by the end, for most of us at least, because of that journey, maybe we don't empathize, but we at the very least can understand them, right? We can at least sympathize with them and the decisions they've made and where it's brought them and what they've lost and what they had hoped for. We can at least understand them and see them for their humanity beyond the excesses, right? And also, I just to say, like, we keep coming around it, but we don't talk like just the I just have to celebrate like the big set pieces, like you mentioned, you know, in that at the first hour mark, you've got the silent film Hollywood studio, all these outdoor sets, like a dozen outdoor sets all going at once, because there's no sound, so it's just visuals and it's just sunlight, that's their light. And there's 12 different movies being filmed at once, and it's just mayhem and but it's magical. Like it's just it's hilarious. We also haven't mentioned how funny this movie can be. And then of course, to me, like there's like the pinnacle scene at like the hour and a half mark, or somewhere in there, with Margot Robbie's character filming her first sound in studio sound scene, and just off the rails, like madness. And but it's so funny and so well done, and shockingly accurate to the history of it, right? Like people were just dying left and right on sets for very different reasons. But like that soundstage scene is just, I could watch that over and over and over. That thing is magical and insane. And then of course, you know, some of the ending scenes we've talked about already emotionally, right? But there's just massive, like really memorable, like I think the first time I saw the film, I came out of it and I was just like, I don't know what to rate this film, because the highs are so high. They're so high. And then there's all the excessive stuff that you just like, I don't know if I want to sit through that again. I don't know if I want to recommend that to anybody. But like, again, for movie lovers, like the highs are so high, the history of it, the magic of it, the mayhem. Yeah, anyways.
Yeah.
That scene where the guy's in the sound booth and falls out is just, I felt so bad for that guy that whole time. It's like, no, I need to get out of here. Oh, he's dead. It's like, oh no.
I kind of wanted to hop back on the power idea of this film, because I think it's pretty interesting, because I really think Chazelle's almost victimizing himself here, because I really feel like in almost every scene the thesis is the people in the industry do not have the power. And that goes for even like the most powerful of them. Like Jack Conrad, especially at the beginning, is kind of portrayed as the most powerful. Like, you know, like the thing he said, like, you know, before I came here, the signs on all the doors said no dogs or actors allowed. I changed that. And it almost feels like when he's going, like realizing he took his craft for granted, he's almost realizing, I think he was in the wrong position almost as an actor. And especially by the silent era, he feels like he probably thinks he should have been more of a producer, which is still a little bit closer to what he's probably wanting to. But I think especially in that party scene, that's when it really emphasizes that the people who have the power are the executives, like these rich, just obscenely rich people who are the ones like funding this whole thing. And then when they're the ones who have the money, they institute the whole thing that now there's no more debauchery, there's none of that nonsense, they cut off that fun and that thrill. Even though I think especially for Manny and Ellie's characters, that's what they're chasing the entire time. I think that's what all these characters are chasing throughout most of the film, is just that thrill of those single moments. Like that one moment, the moment after when they finally get that scene in the sound stage after so many takes and so many mishaps, only for one of them to die, you know, undercutting any sense of like staying power of that, you know, ecstasy of that thrill. And, you know, just the whole beginning with Manny and Ellie just like witnessing just all this, like the ecstasy of just witnessing all that's going on at this party and just the insanity of it. Again, only for someone to, you know, again, Damien just cuts it down and says, well, it's, you know, showing that someone died because of this like insanity. But also showing that happens even when you like normalize it. Then, you know, underground mafia people are where the fun stuff is at, and people are getting screwed by that anyways, including industry people who end up becoming in debt to them. So, but then another interesting argument it kind of makes by the end of the film is that maybe also what makes cinema special is that even though all the people working in it are victimized, when they step back and kind of become the viewer, they also kind of get the power. He kind of gets that at the end when he becomes a moviegoer again. That's part, I think, of the emotion that he has while watching the movie. And also it shows that the audience has the power when Jack Conrad goes into that theater and sees all of the people laughing at his, you know, not so great voice performance, because he realizes, man, these are the people who I want to like impress upon. These are people I want to shape, and they're just laughing at me. I was trying to make them emotional, and they're just thinking it's a joke. But you know, and then he feels like so disregarded for all the stuff that he's been through to try to get to that moment, to try to fit in to this new Hollywood, only just to get completely cut down by the people watching it. And I think, unlike Manny, who kind of becomes a viewer at the end, he can't sit back and be a viewer again, and he's also not going to be able to raise himself up to be the one really in charge. That's, I think, why he kills himself, because he can't be the one step back. And I think it's the same kind of goes for Nelly. She thrived so much on the thrill and the ecstasy of these parties, of the filmmaking, of like being a big star, that when all that like goes away and is threatened, she just can't handle that. She also can't go back to what she had before. She can't go and can't go back to that. And while it also, I think Manny kind of wants to escape that as well. Like, he mentions how he doesn't like, his family still lives in Los Angeles, but never goes back. He doesn't want to speak Spanish. He changes his name to Manny instead of Manuel, to kind of almost disconnect him from like his roots. But then he's almost forced to go back to that, because he ends up marrying a woman who speaks Spanish, and has almost maybe the normal domestic family idea that his own parents had. But he's able to kind of live with that, even despite all the kind of the glory and the love he thought he was chasing.
I feel like that's a good point, because Jack Conrad, to me, he seemed like, there's people who would say like, oh, I'm an artist, I love creating, but then it's like, do you really like creating, or do you just want to be the person in front, like, and want people looking at you? That's kind of what Jack Conrad seemed like to me, because I think if he was really that invested in being part of something bigger and creating something meaningful, again, his idea of, then are you okay with actually stepping back and letting the thing be, or do you have to be the one doing it? Like, do you have to be the one everyone's looking at doing it? And I saw somewhere someone wrote that it's about these people who couldn't let the sun set on their careers. Like, they were not okay with that. Like, I have to be in here still. I have to be the front man still. And that's where I think his own problem really was, and what ultimately led him, I think, down the path he was at.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to think about it, because I think things changed in a way that I don't know. Well, this is what I mean. It's such a fascinating way to look at this, because again, the quote unquote moral police in this film were killing the fun, but it also changed other things that weren't, like you said, like we talked about before, the diversity was shoved out the window. All these things that there were some good things that were changed in the midst of these changing times, but things were I agree with what you're saying, though. I think Jack was a character that could not let go of the way things were and his place within it. And he couldn't grasp the fact that, like you said, passing over. I think that's true. We're running out of time. We should get close to screen it or skip it. But before we screen it or skip it this time, I want to ask you all one quick question. Is this a hopeful film?
I'll just give the answer I gave much earlier, which is I just think Damien Chazelle makes the same thesis over and over at this point, which is that yes, you just can't deny the hopefulness of humanity's propensity to create beauty and art, right? And that in spite of ourselves, that is a reason to carry on and have the hope for that in that way.
I think it's hopeful depending on who. It is either hopeful or not depending who's watching it. Because that's what at the end of the thing I wrote for Screenfish, I wrote it's something about how all of this means nothing and yet everything. I think to some people it's like, well, what's the point? Like, they're just films. Do you really want to go through all this? And then for some people, it's like, oh, but look at what can come out of all this chaos. And it just depends on who you are, really, I think, and how much meaning you see in cinema and art and things like that.
Yeah, I think for the most part, I would agree with that because, like, sticking with what I kind of think this film is about is that, like, I think he's debating whether it's worth it for industry people to do that, to be involved in the industry and actually make movies and go through all of that. But I think he very much thinks that, as audience members, we should be, like, especially with that last montage, really appreciating all that film can do. But again, if film doesn't matter too much to you and you look at all of the things that are happening in the industry, you'd be like, why do we even do this? Let's just scrap the whole thing. If you're a person who doesn't really care that much about movies and you're witnessing all the people who make movies going through all of this, all this death and, all just the terrible things that happen to them in this movie. But yeah, I think Chazelle overall is a believer in the movie and believes that also a lot of other people are, and therefore will see this as a hopeful movie that, maybe it is worth it in some ways to go through all the things that Hollywood and movie making do to a person and to, a whole industry, a whole idea of a place like Hollywood, or in this case, I guess Babylon as an idea. In that, well, that's another. I wanted to quickly point out that Babylon can also refer to, like, the Tower of Babel, and there's the idea of the tower that it took a year for a brick to be put at the top of the tower. So when a brick fell, everyone would cry because it would take a year to replace, but then no one would cry at the death of a person. Which I think is kind of representative of this film, because no one really, like, mourns that much of each person dying, especially, the people who we have no idea in the film. The characters don't have any idea. Jack Conrad gets a little emotional when his, like, producing buddy kills himself, but then he kind of eventually gets over it and tries to, like, move on. But at the same time, there is something, clearly everyone's still working for this thing because it seems so glorious. It's this whole, for the Tower of Babel idea, is this amazing tower that's going to reach the heavens. And it's kind of the same for film. It's going to, it's going to create something that's going to make people have feelings and, like, emotions that they never would have otherwise. And maybe even, experience something beyond what they think is possible in storytelling.
I love that illustration, Daniel. That is a great illustration right there. Because I think this is a very hopeful film for the power of art. Don't think it's a very hopeful film for humanity. I think, but I'm not sure about that. But I feel like this film exposes so many frailties in the human spirit that helps bring these things to create. But I think you hit it on the head with that analogy there. I think that's absolutely it. I mean, it's great when you can lay a brick like that, but how many bodies did it take to get there along the way, and it's this is what I mean. This film to me is a fascinating piece, because there are a lot of questions and not a lot of answers in some ways. But it's also, it feels like there are, but I think that there's not. So with that in mind, my dog is barking. With that in mind, let's screen it or skip it. Babylon, screen it or skip it. Or stream it. Like, maybe it's not in theater. What do you think?
It so depends on who I'm talking to. I'd say screen it. I think I know enough people who will just be entertained throughout it all. I think there's a good amount of people, as Adam pointed out, that will just, like, be done by at some point because it seems so long. But I was entertained the whole time, and I can imagine other people doing that too. And by the end, you might get something out of it.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm gonna screen it. I don't know about you, like, it's like whoever might be watching, but, like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, screen it definitely, and on as big of a screen as possible. but with a disclaimer, right? Like I mean, and it's not even like a people of faith or moral code. It's just like it's everything, right? It's kitchen sink. It's so excessive that's like you have to be able to tolerate and see through it, right? And so absolutely screen it, but with a little disclaimer for in terms of types of audiences, right?
I agree with that. Let's screen it if you can take it. That's basically it.
Or just leave it at what Daniel wrote. I love what Daniel wrote, right? Fablemans in Babylon. See it with your parents, don't see it with your parents, right? Like just that was good.
I like the fact that Shay just said, if you can take it, you can scream.
That's right. If you can take it, absolutely.
I mean,
Perfect.
what are you, weak? Come on. No.
Yeah, it makes it sound like getting in a box. Damien Chazelle's just gonna hit you with so much cinema that you might have to tap out. And also hit you with the crap from the elephant in the he goes for you hard. He doesn't let up.
Very true.
That is a lot of elephant poop that happens in that opening scene, and but therein lies the challenge of this film, is that it is only hard to recommend because it is so excessive and overwhelming, but it is so well done. Yeah. It is so well done. It is like the music is excellent, the performances are great. Its runtime is as excessive as its visuals. Yep. I'm not gonna lie. Yep. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but it certainly felt it. But it's not a bad film. It's just a lot. It's a lot. So maybe it's a stream it. It's I hate to say it, because maybe it is, and it's just a little easier to take. I don't know, but I don't know.
I couldn't imagine.
This is what I honestly don't know how to
stream
answer.
the music. I would say that's what I've been doing. I would stream the music for sure. I can't believe. I don't know how we got through this whole thing without mentioning the soundtrack. It's excellent.
Well, and I appreciate it, because I was also like, I never even mentioned the music when I was talking about La La Land, right? Like, because like they Justin Hurwitz, he literally took a motif from the La La Land score and put it in Babylon. There's a La La Land motif that goes like literally pairing the films together musically, right? The score is incredible.
My dog is signing off for us.
So Steve, for the record, we say stream the score. We definitely
stream the score.
Stream the score. For sure.
So just forget the film and listen to the soundtrack.
Don't forget the film.
Maybe like especially if you're someone who doesn't think they can take it, stream the music.
Yeah. If you're weak,
you'll get.
I look forward to watching the cable version like in 10 years. The edited down version. Like they have the cable version
on an airplane.
Yeah. Like they have the cable version of Pulp Fiction. I was like, why am I like this? Is like they ruined the movie, right? Like just like Anyways.
On an airplane, this movie will be 45 minutes long, and it'll just be called Baby.
Yes.
It'll just be the Margot Robbie scene in the soundstage over and over again.
That's right.
That's worth watching.
This has been so much fun. Thank you so much to you all. I appreciate it. Man, my dog is really trying to wrap this up for me, so I'm going to fly through this. Thank you all so much for your time, and for you at home, a reminder: you can find us wherever podcasts are available. And if you go to the podcast page on screenfish.net, you can download Fishing More, which are small group questions to help you get the conversation started. If you sit through it, if you can take Babylon, if you can take it. And also you can like and subscribe to us on YouTube. Just search up Screenfish and you'll find us on our channel there if you haven't already. But thank you all so much for your time. And for you at home, we started the conversation. This was Screenfish.